Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Laura Shanahan, to give her presentation, Pride of Place, the Research Collections Study Centre and the Old Library at Trinity College Dublin. So Laura is Head of Research Collections at Trinity College Dublin, with responsibility for manuscripts, archives, early printed books, maps, music and special collections. That's quite a list, Laura. A qualified librarian with 20 years experience, she has led on a variety of service transformation, collection management and digital estates project. And Laura joined Trinity in 2018, having relocated from Scotland. And in her presentation, Laura will talk about Trinity's current plans for their new study centre to be located in the iconic Old Library, home to the famous Long Room and the Book of Kells. And she'll explore how this facility fits in the context of a multi-stakeholder building. So Laura, over to you.
Thank you. So as Jeremy said, I'm Laura Shanahan. I'm Head of Research Collections at Trinity College Dublin. And just in the context of Research Libraries UK, I should explain that Trinity College Dublin is a legal deposit library for UK publications. And we've had that entitlement since 1801. So hence in the UK-Irish context, while we're part of RLUK. So I'm going to talk about our Research Collections Study Centre today in the context of the redevelopment of our historic Old Library building. And I'm going to move on. So Trinity College Dublin is in the throes of the enabling phase of its redevelopment of the iconic Old Library building, which is home to the Long Room, which you see here in this video, and of course the Book of Kells. And the Old Library is also home to a wealth of other outstanding historic and contemporary unique and distinct collections. And we accommodate readers, researchers, students from home and abroad wishing to access this material in a reading room space currently in the Upper Pavilion. As part of the redevelopment project, a new study centre and seminar space will be located on the ground floor of the building instead, taking in the full north side of the Old Library. And we really see this as pride of place on the campus, facing out into its main public square in a welcoming, awe-inspiring environment befitting the significance of the collections. So I'm going to present today on the current plans for the new study centre and place this in the location, in the context of a multi-stakeholder building. So the video you just saw probably gives you a flavour of the complexities of the current arrangement in the library. It remains a working library, but it's heavily occupied by visitors, tourists, and the culturally curious as a paid ticket event for the Book of Kells exhibition. So the images you see now are probably the sorts of images you instantly recognise when you think about Trinity College. Our campus is exceptionally beautiful. We have this incredible bell tower, the Campanile, which you see as soon as you arrive in the front square. The landscaping is renowned, and we have these incredible historic buildings. And really, it is a campus that is an oasis in the middle of a really busy cosmopolitan city. So you also will be familiar with the Long Room in this famous image. It's an icon really of Irish identity, and we describe this space as Ireland's front room. And then the third image, of course, is the Chiral page from the Book of Kells, one of the most famous medieval manuscripts in the world, and a representative highlight of our outstanding collections, although we have to admit it is the most exceptional and fine example. So these images may come as a bit of a surprise when you think about sort of the status, prestige and public appearance of Trinity. As a researcher, this is your path into our research collections. So you have a subterranean entrance tunnel taking you from a starting point in the 1960s library. There's a narrow winding stairwell, or you can alternatively take a lift up to the reading room, and the lift is notoriously noisy and disconcerting. And then you're greeted with this glass wall of reserved books on arrival. So it can be a little unnerving. Nonetheless, we do get several thousand in-person readers per year at the moment. This is what our reading room looks like at the moment. It's okay. It's a joint reading room for manuscripts, archives, early printed books, and special collections. We have space for 16 readers. We have only 2 spaces for large format material. And it's often very cool in this reading room, particularly in the winter months at the reading room level, and very, very warm in the staff workspaces, which are at the mezzanine level. And we have a kind of history of challenges around providing access to certain types of materials, such as vellum manuscripts, vellum-bound books, etc. And the reader spaces, as you can see, are quite small. I should emphasize, and I think we've all done this, these are sort of pretend readers in this images. Most of these people are members of my own team. And I should emphasize that the reading room team are regularly applauded, thanked with gifts and emails for their diligent support for our readers. And the service itself is really well received, but the space doesn't quite fulfill expectations. So for example, when you're in the reading room, you really have no idea that this is where you're located. On the other side of the door is this most incredible room, and you're not really part of that experience. So I'm going to fast forward now to our approach for the redeveloped vision. The whole facility and its intersection with other functions in the building is being completely reimagined in the redeveloped old library. The core purpose of the redevelopment project itself is to both protect and preserve the building and its important collections within. For the design principles, if you like, the design vision, the architects have been working to this concept. So they, well, we want to put the founding collections and research at the forefront of the library in the heart of the campus, and they're taking their cue from the collections as well, in their design theory. They looked at the original structure of the building itself, which has this wonderful colonnaded space at the ground floor level. And then the space is divided down the north and south side with this spine wall here. In looking at the space, the architects really identified the symmetry and parallels of the text block form of a book, and have divided the required spaces around this design, which you can sort of see in this graphic here. In the design brief for the Research Collections Study Centre, they were asked to come up with student and researcher space, and they have created a seminar facility and, of course, a reading room. And they needed to segregate this space completely from the public visitor space, which would have new facilities, a new Book of Kells exhibition, and the long room as part of that visitor experience. And again, then these spaces would be divided from the staff workspaces. By staff, I mean my team and the curatorial team, as well as the collection storage and the associated circulation space for the movement of these collections. So the layout of the ground floor lends itself nicely to this configuration. You have really a scholarly space on the north side of the building and a public space on the south side of the building in their design. What this presents itself as then in a little bit more detail is a reading room with up to 34 reader spaces, and then a seminar space with up to 16 reader spaces, which can be reconfigured. The entrance point is at ground floor level on the north side here through the front door into a reception area where you're greeted. The south side of the building then is completely separate from this reader space, and it is very much the visitor side of the building, which culminates in a visit to the Book of Kells in this treasury space here. So once you've passed reception, which acts as that security screening point as well as a welcoming space, you move into the Research Collections Study Centre. And we had asked for this to be inspirational, full of character, welcoming, flexible and functional. Our design brief also asked for really practical items that are a challenge for us now, like universality of access. And you may have noticed the little diagram of the wheelchair being able to move around the space in that plan. Closely adjacent toilets, environmental and light control. So this space is actually north facing, which provides a gentler light anyway for use of the materials. And it will relieve our current issues in the use of vellum material due to us being able to have a much greater control of the temperature and humidity in these spaces. And the space then would allow the interoperability, the ongoing interoperability of access to different types of research collection material, whether it be manuscripts, music notation, printed books, microfilm artifacts, and we'll also have terminals which will provide access to our Born digital archive content as well. So we'd also asked for this adjacent seminar space, and we wanted it to have flexibility in how we could arrange it for teaching with collections, both with the original material and also again with digital surrogates. And we want to use this space as an area that can also be offered over for research activities, say, for example, with researcher workshops where they want to look at collections and kind of brainstorm around the content within those collections. You can see two options for the layouts here. And at the moment, we're looking in quite a lot of detail at the AV equipment requirements for the room. So if anyone has any hints and tips there, would be very, very welcome. So as you can probably understand from these images, this movement from the upper pavilion of the old library building in quite a hidden space to the very forefront of the building completely transforms the scholarly experience of the collections. There's no longer a grappling or an intersection with the queues of visitors coming in to see the Book of Kells, or the discomforting arrangement of transversing that lengthy corridor from the 1960s building. Instead, they'll enter through what I think has got to be now the best front door on the campus. So this is really what the Research Collections Study Centre should look like when we're welcomed back into the building. There'll be a 3-year redevelopment programme. At the moment, we're in the throes of recruiting additional library assistants to support the team, as well as a new services and liaison librarian, and that will also assist with the transition to new services. And during the construction phase, when the building is completely empty and the contractors on board, we will move into a new phase with the design team looking at furniture design and functionality, which I think really will be quite critical in terms of the user experience and also the operational functions. And of course, we'll be revising policies and our service approach, and we'll use a temporary reading room space experience to help us inform how we want to deliver new services in this completed, redeveloped Research Collections Study Centre. So in summary, that's my presentation. I'm very open to answer any questions you might have now.
Thanks, Laura. I think what we suggest is that we'll save the questions to the end.
Sure.
But colleagues, please do start posting any ideas, any questions you have into the Q&A section. So give Laura a bit of chance to respond to those. And what I should have said, if there is a question that you particularly want Laura or Carly to respond to, can you just append that to your question so we know where to put it. But thank you, Laura. Having seen the space myself previously, it's very exciting to see what you've got in mind going forward and what a transformation that will be. So thank you. Okay, we could then move on to our second presentation, and that's going to be given by Carly Sharples. And the title of her presentation is Headspace in the Library, Using UX and Student Partnership to Develop the Research Space. So Carly has worked in libraries for 15 years, working in both public and higher education libraries and undertaking leadership roles at Norwich University of the Arts and now at the University of East Anglia. She has always been motivated by the desire to facilitate student-led engagement with library services, whether that be through student-led teaching approaches, co-creation of services with students, or learning more about student experience through research and UX-based activities. Carly's presentation is going to focus on the recent creation of a new space for students at UEA Library, and she'll explore some of the UX activities she and her colleagues have undertaken to better understand our student usage and needs within the library spaces. So thank you, Carly. Do you want to take away your presentation?
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here to talk to you all today. My presentation is a bit of two halves, really. I do want to talk to you about this beautiful new space that we have devised at UEA Library, which we've called Headspace. But I first wanted to talk a bit about some of the UX activities that we've undertaken, which have led us to learn more about what our users are asking for in our research spaces now. So I'm going to start with the UX. Just to give you a sense of what University of East Anglia is like, hopefully you do get conjured up this brutalist architecture that we're very famous for here at UEA. I've put a picture here which kind of gives an aerial view of some of the campus. This is kind of the main focus of the heart of campus, although there are many other buildings. And the library, as you can see there, is clustered in the middle of the campus. It is very much the heart of what it means to be at UEA. It was opened in 1968. It's undergone a couple of extensions since then, notably in 2004 when the kind of dog leg that's coming towards you was added on, which added a large capacity, but we immediately filled it with books. So what you find inside UEA Library, I think, is a number of floors that all look very similar, very focused around our collections, and not a lot of variety in study space, if I'm honest. It was also designed for, well, it was originally designed to accommodate 3,000 students with an idea of 6,000 students. But now we have just under 18,000. So that's another aspect, I think, to factor in. And we only have the one library which services all of the taught and research activity at UEA. We are a dual intensive university, so we do focus on both areas, teaching and research. So when we were coming back from the pandemic, we, as a user experience team, so my team are kind of the customer service front-facing element of the library, we wanted to know a bit more about how users were actually starting to use the space post-COVID. And we thought that there were changes. And what we wanted to understand was really the user's perspective, untainted by our kind of leading questions or you know, our perspective being put onto what they wanted to tell us. So my colleague Tom McEwen came up with this idea of asking students to give us tours of the library. So they told us what their library experience was. The idea was that we would hopefully have a number of students that would be happy to walk us around the library and tell us what bits they used, why they used them, and how it made them feel. But we did realise that that was quite an intensive activity to ask people to do, and they may not have the time or the inclination. So we also came up with the idea of asking students to map their experience. And we did this by basically leaving out on tables some materials for them to show us their library. So the slide that you can see now is an example, not of the library, but of the UEA Students' Union building, which my colleague Amy wrote as a kind of guide for students as to what we were asking them for. So this is what students were given, and then they were asked to either draw us a map, or they could get in touch with us to offer us a tour. So they had both options. And this is a picture of the tables. We had 4 different stations throughout the library. Our library is 24/7, so students could do this activity whenever they liked. They did not need to interact with a member of staff if they wished to do it. They just could take the map, draw whenever they felt like it, and pop it anonymously in the box. We didn't collect any student data alongside this, so everything was anonymous. We lost a lot of pens. So that was the trade-off for doing the activity in this way. But we did receive 14 maps over the period of time that we had this promotion going. And we also had 2 people come forward to offer us tours, which was lovely. So again, my colleague Tom undertook those with the participants. And that was also very fascinating, but kind of much more in-depth data we got from understanding those students' journeys. We didn't promote it too heavily. We promoted it via social media, but really we just wanted students to kind of stumble across it and take it in their own way as they came into the building. I'm not going to show you all 14 maps, but I just wanted to give you a taste of what we got back, because we did get genuine maps. It was lovely. Some of it did tell us things that we thought were brilliant. This students telling us about areas that they like and areas where they can eat. They've also highlighted mysterious offices, which is slightly worrying because those are our academic librarian offices. So food for thought there. This one was quite lovely. There's ghosts on floor 02, so that's something that we learned. And this student also wrote, go for water on floor 2 and for walks when tired. So just a little insight into research behaviour. The students, I think we were seeing this more and more from what they brought us back, that they're not leaving the library. So they're using various bits of the library in all sorts of different ways. And I just wanted to include this one because that's the entrance to our library, and it was lovely to see that pictured as a welcoming and engaging place. What we did with the data was, well, Tom, again, collated it all, put into words the maps, drawing all of the different kind of tidbits that we got back, and then the inferences. Everything was coded and then coloured, as you can see, and it's in this massive Padlet, which is brilliant. And we then sat down as a group. So we have a marketing group who were responsible for managing this project at the library, and we did a bit of a brainstorm through all of that data and what it meant and what we were taking from it. I don't know if any of you have ever been in UEA library. As I mentioned, because it's been extended a bit, but there's not been a large amount of renovation since 1968. There's not a huge amount of kind of modern feel. There is a lot of grey concrete. There really is. So we did get a high number of comments relating to physiological needs, which I think we expected. There's not enough toilets. There's not enough water, and the students really do want power at every single step, like workstation, which at the moment it's not possible for us to provide. So these were things that we were expecting to see. But then the other kind of thing that came out wasn't a desire for high-tech spaces. It wasn't a desire for more collaboration spaces. It was really about a place where you could relax. And interestingly, we got some feedback from students that indicated a sense of discomfort or possible stress from being around people in the library, intensely working, and you're sort of looking around thinking, well, they're all very focused, but I can't focus. What have I done wrong? And that came through a little bit, and we thought that was quite interesting, alongside this kind of other desire for spaces. So a good example is we have a postgraduate research collaboration room, which our researchers can book and work together. They don't really book it for that, if I'm honest. They do book it to work in it individually, and given that it seats 20, it's very generous individual study space. But it has the little staff kitchen attached to it, which they can, because it's a Cardax access, they just happen to have access to that kitchen alongside that study room. And from doing this mapping activity, we discovered that kitchen has been relabeled the PGR kitchen, and they delight in being able to come in and make a hot drink and kind of heat up their noodles in the PGR kitchen. So really starting to see this kind of possible changing behaviour towards the library as home away from home, and it needing to do a little bit more than just be a study space. It needs to provide more variety for our students in terms of their needs. So now I segue into Headspace, which is where I started. And this was well timed, because as we were finishing up the Show Us Your Library user experience project, we were approached by the UEA Students' Union to consider whether we might be able to help provide a quiet space or well-being space for students, because at that time the COVID restrictions had led to some changes in the Students' Union provision, and they didn't have that to offer at that moment in time. The other reason that they approached the library specifically is because we are open 24/7. So the brief was really to be able to provide a space that can be open to everybody at any point. So we sat down with the Students' Union, with our estates colleagues, and we also ensured that representation from the Students' Union included the Students with Disabilities Officer and the Invisible Disabilities Officer. And we formed a small project group to look at what we could do, and identified a space in the library which was already quiet and had beautiful views across the UEA Broad, and was a space that we could, potentially make into something different. The initial brief of well-being is quite interesting, because I think we'll all recognise that as quite a buzzword. It's a very important issue, a very important element of the student experience now, the research experience now. We do need to make sure that across the whole campus we're considering student well-being. But as we discussed this with our student counterparts, it became clear that actually the use of the word well-being probably wasn't the best fit for this space. There was concerns about it being particularly gendered, or a cultural movement, or medicalized, all of which might mean that some individuals may be discouraged from using this space. So so we moved away from it as being a well-being space, and that's why it became Headspace. And I will show you what it looks like. So it's not large. This was also partly down to budget, but it's because it was a bit of a tester as well. We wanted to be able to create a space that could be enclosed, and again, as I said, the light. So the other thing you'll notice about this space is there's no books here. And I think when the Students' Union came to us, we were as a team like, brilliant, what books can we put in here? We could put wellbeing books in. No, not going to do that. Okay, we can put coffee table books in. And the students sort of said, well, why don't we have no books? Because we just want to relax. We don't need to be inspired every single moment of the day. In fact, we could just be. And we kind of went, oh, okay. So that is why when you look at this space, the focal point is actually plants, and the divider in the middle is open to allow the light. We've grouped the chairs kind of in small groups so they can be informal, although this is a quiet space, so we don't really intend for people to have conversations, and that's definitely worked because they don't really need to. Where possible, we've tried to reclaim materials, so the lights and the furniture were reclaimed from different parts of campus and just recovered. And there's not a lot of colour here. And again, that was directly from the feedback that we received, that bright stimulus was not going to meet the needs of some users, and something that's earthy, connecting the inside of the building with the outside and focusing on calm and relaxation was going to be the most accessible to everybody. And then the other thing you'll notice about this space is how open it is. So there's plenty of space for people to be able to maneuver here if they have a wheelchair, or if they want to undertake transfers. There should be space in order for them to do that. You can't see it here. We did also ensure there are 2 height adjustable tables that were in this space as well, and we did need to automate the doors in order to be able to facilitate accessible access to this room, which again we were able to reclaim the automation metal things from elsewhere on campus. So that was kept the costs down, but it was also kind of within the ethos of what we were trying to achieve. The other element to Headspace was, again, something that changed from its original conception. So we talked about having a sensory room, and that is not what we ended up creating, although I still think that that is something that would be of value to our students at UEA, and something that we need to think about. But Headspace being a shared space still meant that there was no capacity for one individual to be able to completely control their environment if they wished. So that's what the quiet room does. It's just off Headspace, and it is very small, but you can see what we've done with the quiet room is we've just placed a couple of pieces of furniture. The lighting was probably one of the most expensive elements of this whole project, and that was purely because it's dimmable, but you can close the curtains and the blinds and dim the lights, so there's much more control over your surroundings, and you can make that room much more suited to your needs, and that room is definitely used. So I think we're definitely fulfilling a need there that students have asked for and are getting from that space. How has Headspace been received? So we started this discussion in May 2022, and we launched Headspace in October 2022 to kind of coincide with the start of term. So we've been running it for 6 months now. I think that it's been universally positive. The students love it, and I think that is because we are speaking to that need for a different kind of space to any that we've provided in the library before, or potentially across campus before. So I think we did well there. Some of the things that have been more challenging are that it's quite hidden away within the library. It's harder to get to, so I'm not sure that it does meet everybody's needs in that respect. Using real plants, the Students' Union were Absolutely, 100% certain we need to use real plants. And I totally understand that for their relaxing, oxygenating properties, and they do look beautiful. They also come with flies. So that's something to bear in mind for anything that you're doing. But I mean, again, that's something that I think the students have really responded to and have noticed that there aren't really spaces where plants are part of the integral space which the university provides. This goes back again to what they were saying to us about it. Designing spaces for function isn't enough. It's got to be how I feel in this space that's going to dictate whether I can use it to its full effect or not. So we've had really good feedback so far, and we hope to continue to receive feedback. And we have, this is my proudest bit, I think we've really inspired some other changes across campus as well. So I said at the outset we started working with our estates colleagues, which is absolutely vital, and they had some brilliant ideas that they brought to us, and we worked really well together to devise Headspace. But since then, noting the success of Headspace, I think that the fact that it's tapping into that kind of unmet need, another space has been created across campus. This is not to do with the library, but it's called the Warren, because we're playing off the fact that we're riddled with rabbits at UEO. It's wonderful. But this is another space that the estates team have created on campus, again, for students to just be, and they've riffed off quite a lot the same things that we talked about with Headspace. It's calm and earthy. Their plants are fake, but they still have got that greenery and the kind of cleanness and no expectation of what you do with the space. So I think it's been a really, really positive project overall. So that brings me to the end of my presentation today. Thank you so much for listening. Back to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Carly. Do take a look at the chat, some lovely comments, and almost you get a sense that there is a community developing about people who are looking at these type of projects. I know that you mentioned the problematic use of well-being, but I have to use that in terms of people who are developing these types of spaces. So potentially out of this, you could see that a network might develop of people who want to share those ideas. Certainly for me, a comment on concrete, that's certainly, I can remember that from our building. That's something we have a challenge with. And also when you got onto your real plants and flies, that also rings true with me. And I can see we have a comment here from someone who may have a solution for that. So I'll be very interested to hear that. But thank you again. So Laura, if you'd like to switch your camera on and come back in, and we can move into the Q&A session. So as chair, I'm going to take an opportunity just to kick us off. There's a couple of things. So thank you very much for your presentation. And the first thing I'd like to explore is just that your projects cover a number of objectives, and I guess you have to prioritize and you'll have tensions. So I think, first of all, Laura, with you, I mean, obviously you're developing this in the context of a bigger project. And I wondered if you have come across tensions between what you're trying to deliver for the researcher and perhaps the other part of the project is trying to deliver for the public. And has it been easy to get your voice over that what you're doing is hugely important to the institution? Has there been that kind of challenge for you?
Thanks, Jeremy. And I noticed some of the Q&As, and actually it reminded me something I should have put in the slides, of course, was around the user group that was involved in the development and the design iteration with the design team. And that user group's been really helpful to that tension in particular. So the user group's actually chaired by a senior academic, Professor Jane Allmeyer. And in that group, we have PhD representatives, student representatives, other academic users of the space, as well as myself and two members of my team. And so she now sits on the steering group of the whole Old Library redevelopment project as the chair of that group. And that's really helped to make sure that the academic voice is championed all the way through in that multi-stakeholder building that has its various tensions. And absolutely, when you look back at the conversations we've had as a result of that user group, you can see that it has influenced the design ultimately into its final version that now has planning approval, the north and south divide between the two spaces and the avoidance of the intersection between the visitor and the researcher and the scholar.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. And Carly, I mean, obviously great project, but I wonder, was there some debate in the university? Did you have their full support at the top level of the university to use library space in this kind of way? Was there did you have to do any persuading, or were they on board immediately?
No, we didn't have to do any persuading, but I do wonder if that is the magic of the word well-being at a time where there was a strong preoccupation about well-being. We were also kind of solving a problem that had arisen in that there was an absence of space, and so stepping in to help meant that we were right place, right time. So perhaps it was a bit of luck there.
Okay. No, I suppose what I've come across is that obviously some people at senior levels in the university may have a particular view of what library is. So when you introduce these things, which it can sometimes be a bit more of a challenge to get these ideas. But I'm really pleased to hear that was there. Okay, so let's move over to some of the questions which we have this. I think, Laura, just come to you first, Laura. You mentioned about your community board, and I can see in the chat there's a question about just saying a little bit more about is the steering group responsible for the delivery of the project, or is there also a separate project board? And then there was a question in our Q&A about just that wider community engagements, possibly even beyond the university. And there's a question here. What did your community engagement comprise beyond the university community in forming your design choices, civic community stakeholders? So a little bit there about, I suppose, how you've structured it, but also then that wider engagement.
So there are multiple different committees associated with this project because it's so complex. And actually you have an 18th century building that intersects with the 1960s building, and part of the 1960s building is also being treated in this project to create a temporary exhibition space, a rotating exhibition space. So each of the different component spaces in the building have their own subgroups, and the chairs of those then report into the steering group. And then there's also the core group, which is obviously made up of our director, the librarian, and the most senior people in estates and facilities and finance, who bring things for approval through the governance process at the university level. So there's multiple different people who ultimately deliver the project. At the moment in this enabling phase, for example, we have a sub-steering group under logistics and collections care, which is chaired by our deputy librarian, Jessie Kurtz, who previously was at Manchester, John Rylands. And that's about the collection relocation phase and the creation of a temporary reading room space to make sure we continue to provide access to those collections all the way through. In terms of wider user engagement, that subgroup for the reading room or the research collection study centre design hasn't looked to the civic community as such. And when you look at our reader statistics, the engagement on the civic side is very, very low, given the types of material that we're talking about. So in terms of manuscripts and archives consultations, about 50% of our readers are external, but they're usually researchers based at another university, either in Ireland or internationally. And then our readers of early printed books material can often be dominated by students who are involved in MPhil programs in Trinity that use the collections. So we don't have an awful lot of public readers, if you like, to represent in this space at the moment.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's it. And just a kind of small follow-up. I thought obviously it's great that you've now got a really good entrance, which you're going to have. And I just wondered, when you said that, had you thought about what you want that entrance to say to the outside world in terms of, I mean, obviously I know it's a listed building, so you're going to be limited, but did that, tying into that previous comment about which audiences, did you have any thoughts?
We have had conversations about this, because it's going to be really interesting. I mean, even when I step out a side door for lunch here in the old library building, and usually there'll be tourists outside that door trying to get in to see the Book of Kells, and they're at the wrong door. So there's going to be a traffic management thing that will be figured out during the course of the redevelopment phase. But the entrance space for the Book of Kells is actually now going to be attached to the 1960s building, and you'll enter down a sort of, I want to say escalator, but down into the new visitor space, and it'll be quite obvious, whereas this will be quite a discreet entranceway, and there's very little that we'll do with the actual structure of the shape of that door. But we will, well, the name of the space at the moment is the Research Collection Study Centre, so I expect that to be on the door. But we've also obviously talked about how we then deal with the security implications of being right on to the front square. And as soon as you leave front square, you're actually right out into the heart of the city. So all of those different layers are in discussion as well.
Thank you. So Carly, question here, I've got a practical one about, obviously you made a decision in your headspace not to have books, but someone's asking, do you actually have wellbeing resources elsewhere in the library building?
So we do have wellbeing resources. Something that we introduced in September was a new book fund called the Campus Life Book Fund, which was an attempt to recognise perhaps a gap in our provision. We're very good at inviting book suggestions, but with the word academic in front of them. And we wanted to try and challenge that. So it means that our wellbeing books still are not a collection, they're interspersed throughout the building, and we bring them together whenever we can on a book display type basis, and that is always very positive. So despite what I said about using the word wellbeing in conjunction to Headspace, which I think was the right choice, I do think that we probably would like to do more work on an actual wellbeing collection as well.
Okay, thank you. So Carly, just another question then round about, I think, the choice you made about the style of UX, and you said in your bio that obviously you're very experienced in terms of different types of UX. So one comment here, question here, I really like to show us your library activity with the maps and tours. Are there any other changes you have been able to make in response to the notes and comments from the students? And I would add in a second question. How did you find this approach to UX compared to other approaches to UX? What was better? What worked? What didn't? So if you take the first and then move on to the second. Yep.
Of course. What other changes we've been able to make? So we did take on some of the points about water and facilities. We've introduced vending machines, which have been popular, and we did not have them before. And we are looking at other ways in which we might be able to provide hot water. It sounds very basic, but they're quite big challenges in our building. I'm sure that rings true for others as well. So that is something that we're really taking on board. Yeah, I think the other major thing that, again, is a significant challenge is signage and moving throughout the building. It's a really, it's not good at UEA, I have to be honest. So that's something that we probably want to take on over the next couple of years as well.
And then the other piece was about different styles of UX, because my sense is that you have tried different styles. So on reflection, how did this compare?
So we have tried UEA and elsewhere. I've tried a variety of different methods. I think this is broad brush, but pre-COVID, we were quite keen on just stopping people for a chat and maybe offering a coffee voucher, and we'd learn something from them. And that was kind of the tours idea. That was the half and half of the show us your library. It really didn't work post-COVID. There was far less willingness to stop and talk, and I don't know what that indicates, but it just is what it is. So I think that we did very well with the maps, as it really just was very free and open. I think that was a really good way. The other thing that we've done, I've done in the past, is focus groups, and those have been very, very useful because they're so rich in terms of the data you get back. But we really wouldn't get a lot of students engaging with that, and that makes the number 14, while it's not massive, still quite a good variety of response. So I think that's kind of a spread of different things that we've tried, and why this one worked quite well.
It's interesting to hear another example of how COVID perhaps has changed how people behave and how we need to adapt to that. So thank you. So Laura, I've got a question here about storage space. So asking, are you losing any storage space by creating the new study centre? And then if so, how are you responding to that? How are you dealing with that challenge?
What building project relating to libraries doesn't result in the loss of storage space? Especially inadequate storage space that has narrow corridors and very challenging to work within in the first place. Yes, we are losing storage space. We obviously for the redevelopment phase, we're removing all collections from the building as the first task. And so we're working with an existing commercial partner who have provided offsite storage to us for many, many years. And they've built a lot of their workflows around our requirements and have been incredibly responsive. They will continue to have involvement even when we move back into the building, because quite a substantive proportion of the material will not return into the building itself. The long room and the gallery will look broadly the same, and all of those collections will come back, and then there'll be a limited additional amount of storage space within the building.
And again, pardon me, in terms of a conversation with your community, have people accepted that change, that some stuff is going to be off-site, and have there been any challenges?
There, quite a significant proportion of the early printed book collection that's in high demand has already been part of this off-site retrieval process. So we also have a campus storage facility that is Trinity owned and Trinity run, but that's completely full. So we have deliveries already from that campus bookstore and deliveries from our commercial provider already. The big change really comes around the archival collections, and of course, kind of culturally as well. There's a psychological thing to overcome there as well when you are moving your collections from close to hand to an offsite provider. So that will be something we have to keep an eye on over the next 6 months in particular, as more and more material is moved out, and just examining that our delivery and retrieval processes are fast enough to fulfill otherwise as an exceptional service for delivery beforehand.
But hopefully, obviously, will appreciate a much better environment and a much better place to be doing their work, which hopefully will offset any concerns, I'd imagine. Carly, so another question then about the operation of the rooms. So about the quiet space, do students have, or have they asked to have a lock on the door so they aren't interrupted? Can of worms, I realise, but that's but based on my many years of working with students, the questioner says. So has that been a question you've looked at?
It's a good question. We haven't had anyone ask for a lock on the door, actually. We do have, it does have a door. The door has a vision panel. So we talked a lot about this, and many of us were uncomfortable with a student being completely locked away and we were unable to check on them. And I think that perhaps this is a reasonable compromise. It possibly helps that the room is it's kind of at the back of the building and a bit tucked away, so it's not a thoroughfare. And there's a sign on the door saying if the door is closed, then please don't go in. So perhaps a compromise, we'll see.
Okay, and another kind of follow-up about the practical operation of the space, saying, do you have any data points, or have you made a decision that this is a no-tech space?
So the space, it has power. I think even in a relaxation space, the students, our users, all of them are clear that they want power. So no, it's not a no-tech zone, but it is a very, very quiet zone. And I think that the students and users self-police in that respect, because they all very much want it to be that kind of intensive quiet space.
That's interesting. So I was in a cafe just this week, and I noticed they had a notice up saying weekends are no tech space times, so you can't bring your. So obviously I've known from library, but it's clearly it is an issue which some people respond in different ways to that kind of issue. Thank you. So Laura, question for you, one of my favourite topics. They're asking about the listed building regime in Ireland, and is that something you've had to deal with in your project? Has it had to be adapted to accommodate any regulations to do with listed building?
Yeah, of course, it is a listed building, and as a sub-project, we are also renovating a building which is also listed to accommodate the Book of Kells during closure, which was an additional project that wasn't originally anticipated in the programme. So we're very fortunate to have really good estates project managers and a really exceptional design team. The architects we're working with did a major renovation of the National Gallery of Ireland, so they're experienced with cultural spaces, listed spaces, and operational requirements for collection, storage, and movement, and so on. Inevitably, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty detail of working with a listed building, there are challenges, such as, for example, fire evacuation strategies with historic doors, and what sort of mechanical intervention you can apply to a historic door in a space that has to be able to provide evacuation of visitors in that space. You obviously saw from the slides that the structure of the building is very set. So the colonnades that will feature in the reading room will inevitably pose us challenges in the reading room as well for lines of sight and so on. So there's a kind of eco-efficient way to look at it, which is really positive, that reusing the building is the most efficient thing that you can do, but it does certainly pose its challenges. And as much as we are dedicated in our profession to the collections, I would say that everybody who works in this building is dedicated to the building and how it looks and feels as well. So you're sort of willing to accept those compromises as a result.
Thanks. Thank you. Carly, I should have asked, is your building listed in any way, being in a 1960s building, which is definitely listed?
Yeah, it is listed, so that does limit us.
So did you have any challenges with this project around about listing, or is it something you, at least more generally, you have to be thinking about?
It's a more general thing, so it didn't trouble us on this particular project, but yes, more generally there's a number of things that we would change if we could. I mean, most noticeably being the entrance to the library, which has a large revolving door, which serves no practical purpose at all, but we have to retain it. So
okay. So a couple of questions here then. Again, another one about the particular use of the space, and one of our people with us today has been asking, do you get asked whether the headspace can be used for prayer? And is the quiet room available by reservation or simply first come, first served?
So my understanding at the moment from observation and feedback is that headspace isn't usually used for prayer. It's a very interesting question. We where the library is located on campus, our prayer room is just across the walkway in the lecture theatre box, so it's very nearby. But my observation of our users is that if they wish to pray in the library, they tend to try and find a completely surreptitious corner. So headspace doesn't quite fulfill that brief because it's quite open and bright and light. But I do worry about that sometimes. I think that perhaps that's another facility where it's just too far to go to the lecture theatre because they're in the library studying. So that's something to think about in the future. And the question of reservation, at the moment, there hasn't been enough demand on quiet room for us to need to build any of that in. But it's only 6 months in, so we'll see.
Okay. Thank you. Laura, just so one of our listeners has asked to dig a bit further into about how you engaged with your users and your audience. So the question is, I'm interested in finding out more about how you have engaged with your audience users in the design creation of the new research space. So I know you've mentioned you've got your groups, but were there other kind of conversations you had to help shape that?
We haven't really beyond that specific group. Quite early on when I joined Trinity, I worked with 2 Usher assistant professors who have a co-library funded aspect to their academic roles. And we started to undertake a user experience review of the current arrangement and the challenges that students encounter when coming to the research collections reading room as it currently stands. And that was really informative anyway, the principles of that and the issues. And it did help us think about some of the representation of things on our website, for example. When we are in this construction phase and we've moved out of this really intensive multi-project preparation phase, I would hope that we have more time to engage again with our readers ahead of moving back into the reading room space to think about additional requirements. But the academic group itself has been very, very helpful and vocal in terms of detailing what they feel they need for their research and have missed all this time for their research with different collections.
Thank you. Okay, Carly, a question about making people aware of the headspace and the service. So I think you alluded to some things, but in terms of promotional, maybe was it something you didn't have to promote, that actually word of mouth made it happen? But did you have a promotion campaign?
So we did have it featured in the student newsletter, which is an e-newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks. So we worked with the central communications team to put that out, and that makes a news article on our internal website. Although I have questions over how many of our students use that with frequency, but so that was how we launched it. And then our social media was promoting it. I think that probably our usage has grown through word of mouth, and also having the Students' Union being involved in the, you know, co-creating the space, and therefore knowing it very well, they were able to advocate for it to our student body as well.
Fantastic. And one quick practical question one of our listeners has asked: prior to the provision of the Headspace project, did you have smaller breakout areas or a cafe for the purpose of quiet reading social space?
This is a good question, because we've tried to have a variety of spaces in the library, including quieter, louder collaboration spaces. We didn't have a cafe specifically. We have a sort of cafe bar, which is in the busiest area on the, it doesn't work, I've got to be honest. But yeah, I think we don't have a specific cafe with the purpose of sitting and relaxing. So in many ways, Headspace is a start in providing a kind of space we never had before. And
just thinking now that we're talking a little bit about food and drink and all the challenges all of us in libraries have had, and you said earlier on that people self-police and respect. Has that also been true in the Headspace, that people are very respectful, like keeping it tidy, that kind of thing?
Do you know, that is fascinating. I think in Headspace people are quite respectful, actually, and I wonder if it lends itself to that in the kind of way in which we've presented it, and because it's newer and kind of cleaner. There are other areas of the library where we don't see that respect. So yeah, very interesting to observe that.
Thank you. Laura, another question's come in for you. Have you found that researchers want different things to other users for their spaces? And if so, what seems to be the things that they specifically need? So I suppose that's a wider question about just, you know, when you had that opportunity in your project to think deeply about what researchers might want, because you start, were there particular things, I guess, which you thought were quite specific to researchers and what they needed from a library space?
I think what we're finding is that each researcher is quite individual now. And so you want to be able to provide a space that's reasonably flexible to allow them to work with collections in a way that suits their needs. But I think this seminar space that we're creating is going to be really conducive to different ways of working as well. And originally that academic user group who have informed the design wanted the seminar space to be like an overflow reading room, because there was huge aspirations for the number of desks that we would have in the reading room originally that we haven't been able to fulfill because of the physical dimension of the space. But I think the seminar room will enable us to allow things like that group research activity, which hasn't really been feasible previously. And the fact that it'll be really visible as a seminar space as well will help, because prior to the current arrangement with the Old Library project, the only seminar room we had was completely hidden from academic view. It was on a different level altogether. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that space is used for different types of research. And there's definitely something else around the digital components of research with these types of collections now. Yeah. I think I forgot to mention this in one of my slides, but in terms of teaching with the collections, we've seen a threefold increase over the last couple of years in the use of collections and seminars as well. And that's for, you know, undergraduate level, master's level, and then small group presentations.
So we could have this, that space that obviously give you that extra capacity to do more of that activity. Fantastic. Carly, I saw you nodding your head there when we were talking about researchers. Did you want to, I'm not sure if you've done UX in the researcher space, slightly off your topic, but did you want to come in and comment on that?
Well, I think it's quite interesting in terms of researchers and what they need. With UEA, they do tend to get bundled into students, and I know I use that word that kind of really trips off the tongue, and perhaps I ignore a distinct need. But I think in many ways what our researchers want from us is that very focused space where they can be undisturbed and have a sense of individuality and potentially ownership over their own space. So I think that's part of not a shift, but perhaps something that is more, something that we need to think about a bit more when we've created spaces that can be very flexible and very open to all. And actually what we need for this group of users is something that's slightly more research intensive and focused, and also with a kitchen, as I've learned. So
that could be your next UX project, couldn't it?
Potentially.
Okay, colleagues, so I think we're almost at the end of the quiz. Just a couple more questions to go through. So Laura, some specific question around about the collections, and I guess as I interpret this is in the project where you're thinking also about where there are opportunities to make the collections more accessible. I mean, I know traditionally your collections wouldn't be browsable, but I guess that could be everything from improving access through systems or more visible, or was that something which was part of your thinking?
Yes, we do have, as well as the Old Library Project as a major capital programme, which is at the forefront of our philanthropic campaign for Trinity. The virtual Trinity Library is a major component of the philanthropic campaign for the university. And what that is a multi-decade programme, really, to do the sort of activity many other libraries have been doing for years, which is to really focus on cataloguing collections properly that haven't been catalogued before, undertaking the conservation treatment, and then digitising them so that they can be used 24 hours a day by anyone, anywhere. And that's the projects that we've run so far over the last couple of years have been really effective, especially where they're already embedded, the materials embedded in the curriculum in some way. So, for example, the MPhil in Medieval Studies programme here, the student numbers year on year on year are going up, and it's presented then totally honestly as a hybrid programme, which is built upon physical engagement with the manuscripts in our library building, and then also access those digitised manuscripts through our digital collections repository. So that's really the key way in which we're trying to open up access to the collections. In addition, a huge benefit of this project has been the move of all of the collections in the long room and gallery and the other storage spaces in the early printed book side anyway, into our online catalogue. So the collections management team here, headed up by Christoph Schmidt-Cyprian, who many of you may know, during COVID actually took a database that was built by a computer scientist in Trinity back in the 1980s and finally dismantled it into this huge Excel database where we had itemized lines of every single record from our 1872 printed catalogue. And that has now formed the inventory for the decant process of the collections, which means every item that leaves the building leaves with a digital record in our library management system. So because of that as well, we'll be able to move all of those items onto our click and collect service through the library management system, click and collect and read in the reading room. But it means obviously they're visible and accessible to people in a way that they weren't immediately before. You would have to consult the physical printed catalogue or a scanned version of it on a fairly hidden part of our website. So it's a massive step forward.
I'm always very envious of people who manage to incorporate a large element of metadata work into these kind of projects and make people aware of how important that is in order to get the full benefit of what you're trying to do. So
yeah, I mean, it was really fundamental in terms of moving a collection into a commercial storage provider and being able to assure ourselves that the material would be retrievable, which it had to be. That's been a big commitment all the way through to our researchers. But it's incredibly reassuring for me and for the wider library as well.
Great. So just before I get to my final question, one quick one sneaked in for you, Laura, about visualizers. So just asking, are you using visualizers in your seminar space, either ceiling mounted or desktop?
We have a grant funded budget to buy one.
Okay, do you want to explain that?
So through our medieval manuscripts project, actually, we've been trying to build our capacity for digital access in general. So we bought additional digitization equipment for our digitization studio, as well as bringing in the teams to digitize this material. But as part of that grant application, we also asked for funding for a visualizer to allow sort of hybrid interactions or remote interactions with our medieval manuscripts and more from the reading room space. Just a few months ago, our digital systems and services lead left Trinity, and she was going to help me go through the procurement of that. So I need to just find a way to make it happen this year before we move to our new reading room space, our temporary reading room space.
Okay, thank you. So just a final question, I guess, for both of you. Obviously, you're doing some great work and lots for us to learn from, but I wonder, when you were doing this, what were the kind of trends you were watching, and were there other institutions you particularly felt were doing things which were very relevant to what you were trying to develop in terms of your thinking? So perhaps, Laura, do you want to go first?
Obviously, there are the kind of great exemplars of major redevelopment projects like the Bodleian Library, the work that happened at Manchester John Rylands. And so it's reassuring in a way to look at those sorts of trends in terms of how people deal with collections in particular during a major renovation phase. And it's been so helpful to use those case studies to inform the way that we've gone about things. And I'm also just really interested to pay really close attention over the next couple of years to how our collections are used digitally. So during COVID, for example, obviously we provided like a scan on demand or photograph on demand type service, but as we increase the amount of digital material in our digital collections, I'm really interested to see how the usage goes up there and whether there's a corresponding result in demand in the reading room as well for the original material.
Fantastic, thank you. And Carly, what about in your space?
So I think in terms of trends, it's quite interesting to think about what some of our colleagues are doing in terms of off-site storage. It's something that we've been thinking about. So in creating Headspace, we didn't really look more widely because we wanted to make that very UA focused, and we wanted to work with our colleagues in the Students' Union. But what we are recognising is that we have one building, so we need to maximise that. And at the moment, I would say probably about half our collection circulates. So we know we've got material that is being stored there that's not being consulted on any kind of regular basis. And what would it mean to be able to free up that space? And what could we then do with it to further the kind of research environment? So so Headspace is a tip of the iceberg in that respect, but that's a sort of, I think that's probably where our preoccupation is at the moment. Not only how can we free up space by changing our approach to collections, but also what would that then do in terms of the user engagement with the collections we do have? Would it make it more fruitful? Would it make it more of a intensive experience because you can actually get the good stuff? So yeah, so I think that's definitely one we're watching.